Welcome back to the public meeting. Apologies for the delay in starting, but I think we can probably pick up some time for the remainder of the agenda this afternoon. Next item on the agenda is to open up the conversation around review of the GSSB work program for the forthcoming period. We last published a 3-year work plan covering 2016 through 2019, so that is about to come to the end of its term, and we are obliged by our procedures and by the due process to publish an expectation of the forthcoming work plan and to consult on that as well. So we're going to start that discussion now, and I will turn it to Bastian to talk us through this, please.
Thank you, Judy. So for the work program, I think it is important to remind the GSB that the work program serves multiple purposes. One, it is, as Judy just said, is an obligation under the due process. And I think the very reason behind that is that we want to induce some predictability about the standard setting efforts of the GSSB. So to have that stakeholders can return to a document in the public domain that outlines what will happen with the standards in the coming years. I think a second element to this is also it gives the organization, GRI, the wider organization, focus around where the GSB is headed, where the GSB needs support, and I think that is not to be underestimated because that maybe connects to the last element, and that is the ambition of the GSB in the public domain for what you're trying to achieve. When you look at how you can frame the ambition, I think internally what we keep coming back to is that we're currently clearly committed to the continuous improvement. We have issued the standards in 2016, and since then we have, with a certain pace, picked up projects to start to review existing contents and also start to add to the contents. And we are adding to the contents along two lines. One is the sector program, and the other one is to actually introduce new topics like taxes. But the main and probably the bulk of the work is with a review of the existing standards which have been introduced in 2016, but as we have discussed, many of the contents date back to earlier iterations of the guidelines. And formulating an ambition around what we want to include in a 3-year work program starting 1st of January will necessarily actually have these 3 elements. So update of all existing GI standards, provide sector standards, so to complete that program in a certain time frame, and also create capacity around adding new topics or new standards. And I think there is a link that we clearly see now already advancing the pilot with the sector standard. The sector standards will produce more ideas for topic-specific standards, because there are certain things that are currently not covered that actually pertain to multiple sectors. And if the idea holds after the pilot that the sector standard is actually going to be around what are the likely material topics you might want to report on, or you may want to consider in determining material content for your report, then we will also have to direct organizations to the corresponding topic-specific standard eventually. So we will see an increase of these projects. And currently, and that's an estimate from the standards division, a capacity of around 5 new standards on at any given moment in time is probably sufficient to take care of that influx of new ideas. So what I've set out on this slide is 2 perspectives on the ambition of the GSB. One in the more short term and probably related to the work program that we're discussing. We have to decide by when we actually want to have the existing topic-specific standards reviewed. And I think once you set an end date for that exercise, you can actually work backwards and formulate expectations around what's needed in terms of resource, what we have to set in motion when to actually work towards that goal. Similarly, for the sector standards, we're now with the program in a pilot phase, but it depending on when we put the end date, we then have to look at staging these processes and how many sector standards we want to develop in parallel going forward. Lastly, of course, there is something about new projects. They follow probably a slightly different timeline, as usually not as easy as just reviewing existing contents. We've just closed this on tax, I think in a fairly time-efficient way, but we have to acknowledge that this will be always a bit more work, and I anticipate that, generally speaking, we look at timelines of around 2 years for this. Going forward, once we've completed these short-term ambitions, you can look at the medium term and say, well, then what this will actually be about is review all existing GRI standards, including those in the sector standards, and keep this updated. And when you actually look at the ambition of the sector program with 40 sector standards, what you end up with then is a collection of at least 70, if not 80 standards that you have to review on a continuous basis. And that then gives rise to that proposition that you see on the medium term, that probably we will have at any moment in time about 20 review projects under management. That is the type of ambition that we're actually setting out for. This is, again, and I keep coming back to that point, a review project will not always then result in an actual review and reissuance of a standard. Again, one example I would give is occupational health and safety. Yes, we will probably have to review this in 3 or 4 years, look at evolving reporting practice related to the standard that we have issued last year. Will it necessitate fundamental change? It is rather unlikely. So the projects are probably shorter in terms of the time frame, and probably less involved of the resource. So we're not talking 20 times the effort that we've gone through on tax or other things. I think that's an important disclaimer. But it is, of course, we're running right now 4 of these. It's a very, very substantial increase in terms of capacity. But this is the medium term, and this is, I think, in any case, even with unlimited resource availability, this is something that will be post-2022, that scenario. In any case, there is simply no chance that we can scale staffing, our processes, also prepare our stakeholders in the right way to reach that ambition within a 3-year time horizon. So I think the first discussion I wanted to have with you is a bit around what the comfort level is to put an end date to an envisioned end date to the elements under the short-term work program. And I wanted to quickly move just as a reminder through things that we already have discussed in the past, committed to a certain level in the past, and things that have been played back to us by stakeholders as potential areas of prioritization. So one is the fact that we've run a number of projects now, and they've actually resulted in additional projects. So water resulted in the need to have a standard for spills and leaks. Waste results in the need to actually review the materials standard. We are in the process, and we just spent the better part of this meeting on this, in reviewing the human rights and universal, and one of the important implications of that work will be, what do we do with the topic-specific human rights standards, and that includes, from the perspective of the standards division, also the question, what do we do with all the labor-related topic-specific standards, and to what extent can we actually push towards reviewing those as the next priority. We have already in the public domain, and that's confirmed as a programmatic effort and actually a project proposal, a review of the entire section on economic performance and beyond that, everything that's under there. And the remit there was for a group to figure out what exactly GRI standards should be focusing on in the economic perspective. We touched upon briefly in earlier discussion today that overlap between some things that you expect in a financial report that are also highlighted in a topic-specific standard. That's one element of that work. There's more to it probably, and it's arguably the weakest category, if you will, of our offering, and it needs also, in light of the SDG discussion, definitely a fresh look. In terms of priority topics identified for new topics or revisions, I think what is really rising to the top level right now is biodiversity from a standards division perspective, but we also have continuous requests and animo around the privacy type of discussion. So whether it then depends on how you cast this, whether that's more with a focus on technology, platforms, and so on, or it is actually broadly applicable. But that seems to be another subject that has public attention and would lend itself really well to become a new standard going forward. There are other things that have been brought to our attention: customer health and safety as a follow-up to occupational health and safety. It's not necessary to do that, but the community around the OH&S professionals said at the time that this would be a logical next step to extend the discussion. Disability has been brought to the GSB repeatedly by stakeholder groups as something that permeates many different contents of the standards and requires a look. Animal welfare, well, we brought that to your attention yesterday, right? Last but not least, there is, I think, when you look at the sector program, we've discussed that before. There are multiple tiers of sectors that we can address. And what I would propose is to, not today, but in a work program, also outline again the logic behind going through the different priority tiers. This is indicative at this point. What we will, and we touched upon it yesterday, whether it's oil, gas, and coal, or oil and gas and a separate coal or these type of discussions you will have to have. But we worked through a logic of how we can build up this program with the different sectors covered. And from a standards division perspective, we are proposing to put the full program out as part of the work program. So to, first of all, tell stakeholders what the ambition of the GSB is, but also to create the, I think, the dynamic around, well, this is actually directionally where we want to go, and we want to put the right resource behind that. I think I leave it at that, and maybe questions related to what I present, and then we can go back to the ambition level.
Well, I just love this, but where did this all come from? Because, wow, it's really fleshed out.
Yes, it is really fleshed out, and it is. So that's where the team spent time over, well, since last year in November. What we discussed with you at a point is the priority 1 and the priority 2, but 3 and 4 has been developed since. And there's also a logic to this, which we could cover in one of the upcoming calls. Yeah, so I think the guidance that you've given was, well, we have to start with basic materials and heavy impact, and then work through the relationships that those sectors have across the value chain. I think there are 2 design principles here. One is you will see what's in priority 1 actually gets picked up by priority 2 and so on. I think the other element is we had a careful look at whether when you start to create the first priority sector standards, you will give rise to a set of new standards, probably, topics that are currently not covered. And they will actually come up with priority 2, priority 3, and priority 4 again. So basically anticipating also where you have to start, where the root of these type of discussions is, and when you look at sectors, one way spectrum you can use to organize this is also along a value chain, to say, well, priority 2, 3, and 4, they will actually have priority 1 industries in their value chain, and they are still in the broader picture with business relationships, and so they will pick up some of the subjects, the topics that we're discussing. What I would propose, so this is not for the GSB to decide this specific list today, but I wanted to give that indication. And also what I would propose is that we share the background material for this as part of the work program draft, so that you can have a look at it. But we also invite public comment on that structure, because I think that's the last point about maybe the overall work program. As per the process, we cannot just approve a work program, we also need to build in a consultation. And maybe there I can jump just to the next slide. So what we are proposing is actually we have a draft of a work program along the lines of what I'm describing, to now give that to you for review, give you some of the supporting documentation, and then start actually a public consultation on this relatively quickly with two aims. One is to solicit feedback on the work program overall, but the second one more specifically, ask stakeholders for indicating a preference for a sequence of the review of existing standards, because that will be one of the main questions. We have more than 20 to deal with. Where do we start? And also suggesting new topics over and above what we had on this short list of things that have been brought to our attention. What it would enable us to do, if we were relatively quick now, is we would be able to confirm a work program with the first session that we hold with you in 2020, and that would then frame our work for the next 3 years. And it would fall in place, I think, with the discussions we had around, the internal dynamics around GRI and putting together strategy and everything. That would be the right moment to give this input.
Okay, discussion? Well, Bastian, maybe one thing that had occurred to me is when we're trying to sort of the X's that you've put up on the slide here, where we're talking about the overall ambition for updating all the existing GRI standards and doing the sector standards and all of that sort of thing. One of the pieces of information to sort of kind of tell us how long have we got. And what kind of ambition do we need to sort of put out there in our time frame, in our work plan rather, is this around the medium term here, the review of all existing GRI standards every 3 to 4 years. And I would ask, is that the right number? Because it actually, doesn't it kind of mean that we'd potentially be looking at doing OH&S and water 2 years from now, or 1 year from now even?
I think the assumption behind it was at the time that we will gradually move towards a future where there's only incremental change in the standards.
And
that's because so to give you an idea on occupational health and safety, to stick to that one, we have quite some technical feedback on the detail of the implementation, and a light review project in 2 years to bring that feedback back into the standards where necessary. That would be low, but it could be equally 5 years. Or,
right.
That's
so my point is the 3 to 4 years number the right number to begin with? If it is, and it might be, I mean, obviously we're not going to be in any position we will not have been able to say we'll have done the whole first short-term work program in 2 years in order to implement that. So realistically, medium term, what are we looking at here as far as the horizon of the short term? You know, what's the and if we sort of say we eventually want to get to 3 to 4 years, it might be that in that we have to sort of tighten that over a period of time. It's a question of what is that period of time, and therefore maybe there's a specific thing around at what point could we envisage revisiting, even on a light touch level, OH&S and water. Is it 5 years? Is it 7 years, or something like that? And that maybe will help us to sketch out what do our horizons look like.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe two inputs on that discussion from me. One is, I think that reality that if we want to catch up with the international agendas around the SDGs, and that actually necessitates that we have a very ambitious end date for the update of all the existing standards, and also the sector standards, I think, because if you really want to influence quality of reporting, that is essential. So you can then work backwards from that logic and say, well, 2030, that's when we actually see the end of the SDGs as currently projected, right? This is, so to be meaningful to that agenda, I think we need to assume that we have to have something in place in broad lines, at least 5 years before that, arguably even earlier. And so I think the room to maneuver is really, is it 2022, is it 2023, 2024 for the full review? But it has also to do with how quickly you can scale up capacity, because if you come anywhere close the capacity indicated for the medium term, well, we can do a lot of projects at any given moment in time, right? That's a bit the reality that we're looking at. I think the other point about it is, and I think that goes to the out of experience, I think that 7, like the end of the spectrum that you were mentioning, is probably way too long given how quickly the issues develop, and also how detailed the type of reporting that we are after now with the recently introduced standards. It's a whole practice emerging there, and there's lots of things that need attention going forward. That's 3 to 4 years is probably the very ideal scenario. I would happily say from what we have in terms of knowledge at the standards division, 5 years seems to be reasonable. But I think 7 years sounds very long to me in terms of horizon. And just also reflecting on I give the example of water reporting. 7 years ago, there was CDP had probably just started to adopt this. WI and others have started to discuss a bit of the accounting methodologies. There wasn't much around. Now it is becoming something really solid. We had the need to actually develop the standard for that. So 7 years seems to be very long.
I was thinking about the survey to consult to stakeholders about the review exciting standards and new topics, and what if we could include sector standards also, and I'm thinking about what the companies are expected from GRI. I don't know, but we also can ask them if they are waiting for new standards or sector standards, or their review of the existing standards. In somehow I feel that they are expecting new ones. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think our proposal from the standards division perspective would be to have this duality of actually working on the existing topic-specific standards and have a separate conversation as part of the work program consultation on the sequence of the sector standards, if you will. But to actually make the promise that both of those will be developed and that there is no staging between the two, albeit in reality we will have to allocate resources. But the sector program, to be successful, needs to be scaled very significantly in the next year already. Otherwise it's a bit of an empty claim to a space with just one pilot. I think that's pretty clear by now.
Sorry, thanks. I think there is a level of urgency about the first dot point in particular. So if the time frame was, 5 years out from the 2030 SDG horizon, knowing that when the standards were introduced in their current form in 2016, there's probably already content in there that was a decade old, arguably, which would make it, 20 years old by the time we get to that 2025 mark. So I think there is certainly a level of urgency around that rotation of sort of getting through the existing standards. And also if the operative word for the medium-term review about the rotation every 3 or 4 years to make that commitment, if it's on the understanding that what we mean by a review could be a big R review, if there's a lot of movement in that topic, or a small R review, which is still in keeping with the process, I think that makes sense to sort of churn through that sort of maximum 4 years, perhaps.
Each time we issue something new, there's a rollout to, I mean, there's a whole other cost associated with that. And that sort of has to be anticipated. And if they roll out faster, then there's just that many more rollouts that you have to do. And I mean, from the reporter standpoint, this can all be kind of exhausting because they have to kind of change their reporting fairly frequently. But the solution is to make sure that they get educated. And I just occurs to me, we better think about how's that going to be staffed?
Yeah, and I think this is when I in the opening remarks for this session, when I said, well, this is also a signal to the institution overall, what we have to get ready for, what we have to be able to support institutionally.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly the point. To say, if indeed the ambition is to keep the global common language continuously updated, and we're working with these type of timelines, that will inevitably mean that we need to have adequate processes in place to really enable the implementation, the proper implementation of these standards. And I think that's an important signal that is currently not translated into these type of processes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did have another question related to the sector piece, or did you? Are you okay to move? Could you bring just the slide that had the? Oh yeah. So what was sort of exercising my mind, coming back to a very early paper about the animal welfare topic, and so I'm just wondering, and it might be just me trying to sort of think of some practical examples, but the relationship between the development of the topic specific standards and the sector program. If we have agriculture, for example, and we imagine the intention is that the agriculture working group, when it comes to the sector work, will look at animal welfare from that lens. But equally, that will possibly spill out a topic specific standard on animal welfare. Equally, then that cascades out of food, beverage and tobacco, also food retail, pharma. I also had textiles, and so pharma and textiles and even leisure will have takes on animal welfare that might be quite different from agriculture in that sense. So now I'm really overcooking.
No,
Am I
well,
thinking on that?
I think, but one of the inherent logics behind this, how this cascades down, right, is that probably, yes, we will pick up animal welfare and agriculture already. And we will necessarily also have to have a discussion with that group what they create, right, in terms of products is used later and the value chain. So we will have that linkage as a byproduct of that first discussion already. And then it will be a question of framing when you can actually start to develop an animal welfare topic-specific standards. What we see just from the work that we've now done on things like occupational health and safety and water, there is a level that you can lift these type of discussions to, that they become generic and applicable to very many sectors. Because yes, there is a very specific angle towards animal welfare and pharma probably, but at the core of it is the same questions, right? How do you address this subject, and what are the questions around that? I think it is also the deliberate attempt not to develop the sector-specific disclosures then, right? I think that is as one of the basic premises of that program. Yeah.
Okay, Bastian. Yes. Shall we go back to this next steps over here? You'll share with us the draft work program. We may need to talk about how we sort of exchange views and do some refinement as a group when we don't have a meeting planned between now and the middle of October.
So what we would propose is to put that on Annotate, to have you discuss this, that we summarize the comments received in our proposal on how to address them, and then bring this to you for electronic approval whenever that's the right moment. I think based on how other standard setters do that, the work programs are not necessarily very extensive documents because you don't want to specify the nitty gritty on this. You want to stay at a reasonably high level. You want to give enough information to indicate how the things will unfold and what the commitment is, but we don't want to specify the specifics of how the sectors are defined or all of that in the work program itself. So we're looking at, I would guess, a 5-6 page document, something like that, only. So I would hope that this enables a relatively quick turnaround. The mid-October is probably me being over-ambitious, but to get there probably towards the end of October, that you feel comfortable about a version for public consultation. That's not the final yet. Yeah.
Peter, did you want to? No. Okay. Right. And of course, what we'll need to approve is essentially a sort of discussion document to start a conversation with stakeholders around, rather than a sort of deeply reasoned, worked out timeline. Kent, did you want to say anything? No. Okay. All right. If that's clear, if there aren't any other questions or discussion points around that, then I think we'll look forward to seeing this quite soon, in October. Yeah. Okay, very good. And we'll have to share some dates and process points and so forth around how we discuss it.
So what we're committing to is we will provide this first input for review, and with that an outline of how we want to engage you on moving this towards an electronic approval, and also indicating already a bit of the timeline for that, right? And if anything shifts then from there, then we'll keep you posted on this. But I'm not sure, we can test that at it, but I'm not sure that it necessarily at this stage necessitates another call that we would have to put in, or delay this discussion till end of November, which is our next scheduled call. If the first draft is not meeting your expectations at all, and we actually have very fundamental concerns that we cannot address, we can still decide that, but I wouldn't put a call in now for this. I don't think. It's maybe also a test for how we will deal with meetings in conjunction with electronic processes that we need to have of some sort to move agenda items between meetings, right?
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I think that
Thank you.
probably concludes our this particular point on the agenda. The next session is, well, we were meant to have a break. I'm not sure it's really all that useful for us to have a break right now unless we need it in order to get the staff members in the room. Right, okay. Okay, maybe what we'll do is have a brief pause on the public meeting just so that we can get back in the room. We'll call it 10 minutes at this point. And I mean, that's exactly what's in the published schedule anyway. So we'll come back here at 2:45 Amsterdam time. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. We're down to the final content portion of this two-day GSSB meeting. And for this, we have been asked by the GRI Secretariat to consider a proposal that they're making that's related to the notification requirement in the existing standards. And for this, I'm going to is it Shivani, or is it Bianca? Bianca? Okay. From the Secretariat to tell us about the proposal, and then we'll have a conversation around it there. So if you'd like to.
Thank you so much. Hello everybody. My name is Bianca Kovlesko, and I'm the manager of the digital services at GRI. So that includes the standard repo registration system and the database, sustainability disclosure database. And together with Shivani Rajpal, the director of services, we would like to present to you our proposed update to the notification requirement included in the 101 Foundation standards. How can we move the slides?
sorry.
Got it.
Okay, great.
There it is.
Great, super, thank you so much. So our proposal is to add the wording or third party on behalf of the reporting organization in the beginning of the clause 3.4 to read as the reporting organization or third party on behalf of the reporting organization shall notify GRI of its use of the GRI standards and the claim it has made in the report or published material by either, etc. So the two options. There are two main reasons why we suggest this proposal. First, the registration system, or notification system as we also call it, was introduced a year and a half ago. And since then, we've introduced different processes to understand the challenges we're facing, but also to streamline the registration. The notification requirement and the registration are still new for reporters, and it takes considerable time and effort to actually make the reporting organizations aware of this notification and this requirement. Sometimes we've also been facing language barriers because of different countries where English is not the first language that is being spoken. We've also encountered some technical difficulties, which the team is currently solving and resolving. But however, the aim should still remain to make the registration as easy and as more accessible as possible for everybody who's using the GRI standards. And secondly, the reality is that companies are contracting third parties to help them with the sustainability reporting process or to create their sustainability reports. And they're also expecting to have an end-to-end process from them, and that also includes the notification requirement to the GRI. In our experience, and look at the latest numbers, around 20% of the standards reports were submitted by third parties. Through them, we were able to get the information regarding the organization, the reporting organization, as well as the information about the report. However, we could not get them through the registration because of the limitation that we're having currently with the notification as it is. So, in conclusion, by opening this requirement to third party on behalf of the organizations, we believe that the standard reports that will use the system will increase in number, and we also consider it will be easier to communicate about the notification in the countries where English is not the first language being spoken. And hence, we hope that the notification experience will be smoother for everybody. That was it. So any questions?
Right, Kent, why don't you start?
Yeah, I'm just wondering about how successful is it? That is, are you getting tens of thousands of reports through the system, or is it some subset?
Well, we do get through the system, through the current standard repo registration system, we get about 500 on average every month.
Just a practical question about third party on behalf of the reporting organization. Does that assume that the reporting organization has instructed the third party, or they would be aware that it's being submitted, so you can't have anybody submitting whatever seems to be a GRI report into the system? Okay.
Yeah, the idea to still have a declaration when they actually are submitting the reports, to have a declaration when they're saying they are a third party on behalf, so representing the reporting organization.
Yeah, my reading of that was always that if it's a reporting organisation, if they are causing someone else or a third party to submit the report on their behalf, it's still them doing the reporting. That was my way of looking at it. So yeah, I've always assumed that third parties could submit a report. So I wasn't aware that the literal wording was a problem, but if this makes it easier, fine.
I think Peter probably expresses a lot of the view around this issue from what I've understood from other GSSB members, that there was never any intention to limit the capability of notifying GRI to certain people or what have you. I'm wondering if you can sort of explain what is the nature of the barrier that you've encountered around this. Is it simply your own interpretation of it prevents you from completing the registration? Or is there something about, because I understood there was some kind of a technical issue to do with this.
I think I can also respond to this, because actually the registration the system that exists was owned by the standards division at the time. And that has to do with, this is all geared towards getting the contact information of the actual reporting organization. And as part of the GDPR related measures, it is actually not a possibility to have a third party submit contact information without, like, random third party to provide you with contact information and then for us to reach out to this organization based on the contact information provided. So what was advised in the technical process was that there needs to be some kind of confirmation that either the reporting organization is the one submitting this to have a legal basis for reaching out, or, and that's now exemplified here, that a third party is actually acting on behalf of, which would also then give clearance for this type of information.
If I can follow up on that, if I understand you correctly, then the proposal that's being required here, or that's being made here, is that the reporting organization or a third party who has been duly authorized, how do we check that? How do we check that it isn't, as Corley says, just random person?
That remains an issue in this, and I think from a GDPR perspective, this is always it's an uncharted terrain. Many organizations have that difficulty right now.
Rama, did you want to make a point?
It was exactly the question that you just asked. But then on the, so you said that there is some kind of a declaration that the third party can provide. So what's, and then it brings up all these issues. And in the previous session, we discussed on the, the accountability, who will take, will the organization, reporting organization take ownership? But is it possible for the, let's say if a reporting organization does not have the capacity, they hire a consultant or a firm to prepare it, but the filing is done by the organization itself. So what is preventing, the consultant may be the one who's actually helping them do it, but you still have the organization file it. Is there a, I can understand that you're putting up from a technical perspective, but is there something that prevents, the filing to be done by the organization itself, even though the physical act of filing may be done by someone else?
So I'm going to quickly answer that question. Basically, that's exactly what we're seeing practically. Like Bianca mentioned, from the numbers that we have, around 20% of the organizations are 20% of the reports that are submitted by consultants, and the reporting and when we explain to them that the reporting organizations need to take an action, the action is not really taken. So that is the reason why they just stand in the queue and we are not able to register them. So this is our solution, a proposed solution, to at least bring those reports into the system.
But then that to me is a bit. I mean, I'm new to this process, so that's why I'm. But then that is, I mean, if I'm being kind of, put my doubting hat on, is that maybe the firm or a consulting firm must have done this work on the side without the reporting organization fully on board. So yes, the filing happens, but then then it could possibly later on lead to complications. If the organization is not fully on board.
So the responses, the majority of the responses that we are getting currently from these consultants are based on they don't know who in the organization is going to be responsible for this. They don't understand that why this is the reason. Why would when they wrote the report, they were actually given the end-to-end consultancy for this, then why couldn't they submit the report? And like Peter also mentioned, this is the literal meaning that we took from the sentence. So we prohibited them to take an action further on that. But this is a question that we've been not able to address as to why, when they can take all the other actions on behalf of the report, and they're not really, they have contracts. And I don't know if we should go into the details of really reviewing those contracts or not. Where would our responsibility end in this? But there are two types of consultants, and that's consciously we are saying the consultants who help the organizations and declare that they help the organizations in preparing the report, we are accepting the reports from them. We also work with lots of third-party consultants who would just find the report from the internet, but we're not allowing them to take the further action. So that's the differentiation that we've actually made when it comes to what can be accepted and what cannot be accepted.
My sense is that this is very specific issue that the GSSB probably doesn't really have much of a stake in, actually, and if I can sort of make an effort to speak on behalf of the GSSB or to offer something that I think might get us somewhere, it's that I think we would probably defer to the Secretariat to find a workable solution based on appropriate legal advice that will get through whatever the technological barriers might be on your end of things, and don't view this as something that necessarily requires a wording change in the standards, or if it does, maybe we do it as an FAQ or something like that that kind of doesn't. It certainly doesn't rise to the level of public exposure draft and things like that. It really isn't something that I think we need to sort of deal with in that way. Gustavo, would you like to?
Thanks, Judy. What I see, the issue is quite further about the consultancy that can make a report. The data partner program, there are a lot of organizations that are also data partners around the world, and they are the one who uploaded the reports, and regarding or not they are their clients or not could be different. So it's like the problem is go further than that. It's like as Rama said, you have a company they make their own report, no consultancy firm, but the data partner uploaded, and it is stuck in the same place as everyone, all the reports. I understand what Bastian said about the process and to the company get responsible about the report that is uploaded. I feel that it's like the problem is like in the workflow of the process about to approve the report. I feel it's like if the notification could be just only, I don't know, to include it or to be in the database, it's also as previously of the workflow is just enough. That could be a good solve to all of these. So regarding that, I put some comments about to include in the standard. I don't know if it's necessary or it's good enough to include about the database in the notification, or to include even the data partner program. I don't know, but I think that the workflow is have something to correct, because we have language issues, and the mail goes to spam, and the mail is I don't know, a very generic mail of the company, and then nobody get that notification. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, Kent just said these are legal issues. I mean, and to Peter's point, I think our interpretation from the beginning had been that the reporting organization includes people authorized on behalf of the reporting organization, surely, but we're not with the exception of Corley, we're not lawyers. Right, Loredana, indeed, yeah. I mean, I think the sort of the mechanics of this was never something that the GSSB ever sort of considered in creating the standard. I mean, one thing that I would sort of put back to you guys is just, as I recall, the request to do this in this way in the first place had come from the Secretariat as a means of building the contact list and thereby having robust numbers, contacts, the ability to kind of keep in touch with, build the community, all of that sort of thing. Not that it's not our concern how you do that, but I would just sort of put it back there that we were responding to that request in the first place, and you may be undermining your ability to meet that ambition by doing this. But then, as far as to Kent's point, I think as far as the mechanics, the way that they work out in the end is a matter for legal advice rather than for the technical reporting standards advice. It's not something that we can really advise you on. At least that's what I think I'm hearing around the table and interpreting about this.
Well, I think our concern, the concern is that, somebody uploads something that's improper and that we take some kind of liability for that. And that's sort of a question to ask the attorney, a lawyer, right?
Okay, so where have we got to with this conversation then? If I can summarize, I think the GSSB is quite happy for you to go about doing whatever you think is the right thing in terms of executing the registration of reports properly. We don't see that there's any sort of particular restriction placed on who would be authorized to do this by the phrasing of the standard itself. But we would also just caution that we're not qualified to kind of advise you as to what's appropriate or legal or otherwise, and to trust that you would be able to get that advice somewhere. Is that fair, members? Yeah. Okay. Can I ask? Do you have a response? Do you have further follow-up questions? Do you want us to do you want to present a different point of view on this?
No, I think that is fair enough. That is very understandable, and we're now going to take an action, look at it once again, see what legal actions we do need, what legal advice we can get, and we'll report back on our findings for that.
Yeah, and please do tell us if we've missed something or if we're not giving you the ability to do what you feel you need to do. I mean, it's certainly not our intention to make this difficult for anyone. Let us know what you find and if there's something else that we need to do by means of follow-up.
Perfect.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I think that's us actually. Right. That actually brings us to the end of our formal agenda. I'll just ask the question again. I haven't heard anyone raise any other business that they would like to at this point, but if you could speak now or forever hold your peace, that would be great. Summary of day 2. It's very hard to summarize what happened today. We went through so many of the different proposals on the universal standards, as you know, there's quite a lot of work that the standards division has ahead of them now. But you saw the timeline proposed for that, so the next few months are going to be very important for us. Also, we talked about the work program and the process around developing the proposed discussion draft to be then refined and finalized and shared with the public. We specifically want to do this in a way that will engage the stakeholder council and the board. And I will just flag up that they both have meetings coming up in the second week of October, so there'd probably be something very specific around flagging to them the forthcoming availability of that draft, and asking them to sort of think about how they might consider providing us with some feedback around that, possibly before it goes into the public domain for broader consultation. Is there anything else that anyone else would like to state at this point? In which case, I think we can... Bastian, yes, you can.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank the GSB members. As you've seen from the materials, the team invested quite heavily in preparing these discussions, but I think we have the right input to move this forward. And have an equally, I think, focused and then hopefully also successful discussion next time around, moving this to more towards public comment. I think the new format worked really nicely from our perspectives. And I just wanted to say, if you have feedback on how we prepare the papers in particular, that's very welcome, and be in touch with the team, because there will be a new set of papers in the making as of tomorrow probably, if not now, because some of the team is not here. So thanks again from our end.
Can I extend the GSSB's thanks to the Standards Division and to Bastian for his leadership of all of that, but for all of those who've been involved, from Mia and Sarah Jane and Laura and all the rest of the Standards Division team for tireless efforts in preparing the materials and helping us to go through all of that very voluminous content. Also, I'd like to thank all of you for making the time and traveling, and for those of you who are participating remotely, for bearing with us the whole time, and for contributing down the phone. Finally, I think maybe the Secretariat staff, including Helen and Jill, for all of their support behind the scenes. That is very much appreciated. Am I missing anyone? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much to all of you who may be listening, and the summaries will be available in due course. Thank you.